more people to join. So just hang out. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Good to see everybody.
I'm here.
Hey, Mick. Just giving it till about 8:35 for people to join, and then I'll get started.
Sure.
I've disabled the waiting room so people can just come right in at this point. It's good to see some faces of people that I got emails from that I've never met. Gordon Grant. And we got people from all over. I saw somebody from Australia on the call.
Hi there, Wayne. Good to see you there. This is Bill. Oh, maybe I can't. And Gordon, good to see you.
Hi, Wayne. Oh, we got 33 participants now. All right, just about one more minute, we'll get started. All right, so we're going to get started now. Welcome everybody to the first National Zoomcast for 9/11 Truth Action Project. The theme of the Zoomcast is putting 9/11 truth into action. And we got some guest speakers tonight. We have Mick Harrison from the Lawyers Committee, Bill Jacoby, and some of our project leaders, Morgan Nowlen and James Richards. A few ground rules. Everybody's muted. Please stay muted unless you have the floor. You can post questions in the chat, and questions will be addressed at the end. You can also chat. You can also send questions to this email address, which I'm going to post in the chat right now. tapzoomquestions@gmail.com. I'm putting it in the chat now. The meeting is being recorded, and I'll just give you a brief overview of what we're going to do tonight. We're going to hear from Mick Harrison first, who's going to update us on the actions of the Lawyers Committee. Then Bill Jacoby will talk about putting 9/11 Truth into action. And then Morgan Nowlen and James Richards will talk about some projects that are going on within TAP. I'm going to talk about the Justice for 9/11 Heroes project, and then we're going to have Q&A. My name is Mike Santangelo. I'm from Staten Island, New York. I'm a coordinator of the New York City chapter of 9/11 Truth Action Project and a TAP board member. I work for New York City's crisis hotline. And now we're going to hear from Mick Harrison. Mick Harrison is the litigation director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, as well as a public interest lawyer in private practice. Attorney Harrison has more than 25 years of experience litigating whistleblower protection lawsuits and environmental protection citizen suits nationwide. For those 25 plus years, Attorney Harrison has represented and assisted citizens groups and whistleblowers in their efforts to expose violations of law and misconduct by government and corporate officials. Let's turn it over to Mick Harrison.
Thank you, Mike. I want to give everyone an update on where the Lawyers Committee's litigation and other activities stand. And at the end of the entire event, I think we'll have some time for Q&A. We have three basic categories of efforts underway. Litigation is the most obvious one. We have a lawsuit against the FBI, which some of you are familiar with. It is now pending on appeal in the DC Circuit, Federal Circuit of Appeal, on standing issues. The district court dismissed it erroneously, in our view, saying that none of the plaintiffs had standing to sue. We didn't get to the merits yet in that one. That case, if you don't remember, is about the 9/11 Review Commission, the 2015 follow-on commission, not the original. And the Congress had mandated that there be a new evaluation of all 9/11 evidence not considered by the original commission. And the FBI did set up a new commission with Ed Meese as the chair. They issued a report in March of 2015, but it did not look at the new evidence in any meaningful way, including ignoring all the demolition evidence, which is what motivated us to bring that lawsuit. The second lawsuit we have pending is what we call a mandamus lawsuit. It's in the district court in New York, federal court. We sued the U.S. attorney in New York, to whom we had submitted our petition for the grand jury. Most of you know about that petition, which submitted a significant amount of scientific evidence regarding demolition of the World Trade Centers, 3 buildings there on 9/11. So even though we had an encouraging initial letter from the U.S. attorney indicating he would comply with the federal statute that requires the evidence submitted by citizens of a federal crime be submitted to a federal grand jury, we since then have seen no evidence that that actually has happened. So because we couldn't get the U.S. attorney to tell us, even though one of the assistants spoke with us by phone, they just wouldn't tell us the status. We brought a suit in the district court to force the U.S. attorney either to advise the court and us that there has been actual compliance, or to disclose that the grand jury has not received our petition evidence, and to get an order from the court to force the evidence to be submitted to that grand jury. That case is awaiting a decision from the district court. The government filed a predictable motion to dismiss on standing as well, and we don't expect the government to win that, but we're waiting to get that decision. That issue has been fully briefed. We have 3 other federal litigations active, and those are all Freedom of Information Act cases. The first one we filed was 2015 against FEMA and NIST, and it has to do with the building performance study by FEMA and the data underlying that, which initially, and I represent David Cole in that case, and the Lawyers Committee is supporting that case. Initially, FEMA and NIST said they didn't have any responsive records, even though they did this lengthy study, which we found kind of amazing. However, when we pressed them, they ended up saying that, well, FEMA said we had records, we gave them all to NIST, And when they said all, they meant literally all. They were saying they didn't even have any computer hard drives, any backups, any email records, nothing left from all the work they did on the building performance study, which is also pretty amazing. So we did sue them after years of delay in responding to David Cole. And we do have a tentative promising decision in that case from the magistrate judge, who was asked to decide the motions for summary judgment and our discovery motion. And the magistrate recommended to the trial judge, who now has the matter back in his hands, that our motion for summary judgment not be granted in the moment, but that our motion for discovery be granted in the moment, and that we be allowed to do discovery and then refile our summary judgment based on the evidence we find. That magistrate also recommended denying the government's motion for summary judgment, and as I indicated, recommended giving us discovery, which is a bit of a breakthrough, but it's not final, and it shouldn't be really talked about until we know whether the judge is going to agree with the magistrate or basically reject that recommendation. We should know that shortly, but a promising development nonetheless. The other two lawsuits under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, are more recent. One is against FEMA and, against NIST for the interviews they conducted and obtained at the World Trade Center. They refused to release those, arguing certain FOIA exemptions or privileges. And that case is awaiting a decision on summary judgment motions by both us. Again, that is for David Cole. I'm representing him, supported by the Lawyers Committee, and summary judgment motions by the government. The last FOIA case, the fifth of our active litigations, is about column 79 at the World Trade Center, Building 7. We asked for all the data regarding that connection, where NIST says the collapse initiated. They found excuses and exemptions to rely on to not give us that data either. That case is pending also on competing summary judgment motions. So we could have decisions on 4 of these 5 cases any moment, and we'll keep you apprised of what happens with that. In addition to the lawsuits, we have an active Freedom of Information Act campaign, a number of areas where we're inquiring through the FOIA statute. If you all have ideas for us on records you would like to see obtained from the government, feel free to email us through the website, or if you have our contact information, contact us directly with your suggestions. We'll consider those for the FOIA campaign. And we also have some investigations pending. We have one on the anthrax attacks post 9/11. We're also continuing our inquiry into the Trade Center and the building collapses, looking into Shanksville and the incident there, as well as the Pentagon. So I'll stop there for the moment, and also note that we're evaluating additional lawsuits or litigation options. Again, if you have suggestions that you think might be strategically, beneficial, feel free to talk to us. So Mike, that's all I wanted to give you for the update.
Thanks so much, Mick. Thanks
You're welcome.
for the update. And, we'll see you again later for Q&A.
Okay.
At this time, we're going to hear from Bill Jacoby. Bill is a founding member of the boards of both the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry and the 9/11 Truth Action Project. He's the current chair of 9/11 TAP. Bill has a BA degree from Dartmouth College, as well as a master's degree in public administration and a law degree, and is a member of the New York and Pennsylvania bars. He served as an urban community development worker for the Peace Corps in Peru in the 1960s, and went on to hold senior level management positions in municipal and state government agencies in New York and in nonprofits in the fields of housing and community development. He later served as vice president or president of several small renewable energy companies, one involving rural development applications of solar energy in Latin America. Bill.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Let's see if I can get this PowerPoint up here. I'd like to use these.
Bill, I think you're frozen. You might want to.
Thank you, Mick, for your report. And it's great that we created an opportunity for people who can see. Oh, wait a second. No, I think I may have frozen. Oh boy. Okay, I'll turn off the video and put it on share screen. 1 second. How's this? Is this better?
We can hear you, Bill.
I can hear you,
Okay,
Bill.
fine. Okay, good. I'll just, okay. Yeah, I think you can hear from Mick's report that that we're in this for the long haul. We never thought that there would be a great victory, a 9/11 ultimate victory in 12 months or probably even in 24. But you can hear that the groundwork is being laid, and particularly in important areas like freedom of information. And this is why the Lawyers Committee really needs our support on an ongoing basis. Also, I point out that it's, having worked with Mick, I know what a great lawyer he is, and mostly the values which lawyers would wish that all lawyers had, or most lawyers would wish that all lawyers had. But it's still the case that we haven't had a great outpouring of support from the legal profession. So this is another reason why we need to spread the word and try to create a groundswell whereby the legal profession as well as other communities will come forward to join our joint quest here. So I wanted to take a few minutes to, for those of you who are new on this call, and there are many people who have joined TAP and who we've not interacted with much. We want to thank you for coming. And so we want to let you know a little bit who we are and what we're all about, and how we see our role as being, among other things, to be a critical source of support for the Lawyers Committee. TAP, there are a number of 9/11 organizations, but TAP's unique focus is on the cover-up, the 19-year cover-up. It's, if the crime was a pivotal and very important one, the conspiracy that had to lie behind it, conspiracy in the literal sense of multiple participants and actors, was worse. And the fact that a cover-up could last for 19 years is perhaps the most worrisome thing of all. And so in our efforts, we try to shift the focus to that. And we ask such questions as, how could such a thing happen? And what does it reveal about our political system? What does it reveal about our civil institutions? I think, for example, say you're a 40-year-old engineer, high ranking in your field, and you have an opportunity to become the dean of an engineering school in the United States. And you obviously weren't around when 9/11 occurred, except maybe as a 20-year-old, you weren't involved in planning it, you weren't involved in covering it up, and you become the dean of this engineering school, and then Architects and Engineers calls you up and asks if you'd like to be on a panel to discuss the Halsey report. Well, I may not know what exactly goes through this engineer's mind at that point, but I think we can all imagine that he'd have some resistance to taking that assignment on, because apparently all the engineering schools in the country have resisted taking on such an assignment. So if we ask, how could this happen, that leads us, it kind of is a window into the bigger problem that we face. The same was true for when a 3-story poster was placed across the street from the New York Times saying, "What about Building 7?" You would have thought they would have grabbed their pencils and had an apology out the next day and started a big long series. Didn't happen. The other newspapers didn't cover the fact that the Times dropped the ball. So this tells us we have to look pretty deep into what our strategies are. Writing letters to the editor apparently won't be sufficient. And that's why we say that we really need to engage some of our people in thinking about what strategies, what new strategies we need to develop, and how we can, that will be effective to bring about change. I created a long list here in small print of things we've been doing over the past 2 or 3 years. I don't want to go through them all, but if we did, you would see that a lot of them have to do, they're kind of internally directed as a result of our early experience in our first several months after September of 2016. we put up a petition, and we got several thousand people signing the petition. We thought we were really off to the races. We then suddenly discovered that our small board of volunteers was not set up, was not structured, was not supplied with the resources we needed to interact properly with all those volunteers. And as a result, some of you, I don't know, certainly some of the people who signed up early, were not contacted, and their offer of assistance was not fully utilized in the beginning. That was our first lesson in what it takes to create an organization that can manage success.
Lost your audio.
Growth. So we had a great, as an organization grows arithmetically, complexity grows geometrically. Lost my audio. Interesting. Huh. Okay.
You're back, Bill. You just have a delay.
Okay. Okay, that's good. As an organization grows arithmetically, its complexity grows geometrically. So we've tried to do a lot of internal work to prepare for that, and now we're ready to go forward. And this Zoomcast kind of represents our being ready and for reaching out to the many people who have indicated our support. We've got about 3,500 people or so in our database right now, and we are reaching out to you increasingly. Our organization is going to be working in three main areas. One is organizing, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but grassroots organizing and building alliances. One is in communications, and we'll talk about the specific projects in a moment. And the third is project management, and recently we're realizing the need to focus on doing some fundraising also, so that we'll be in the position to be able to manage increasing growth when growth outstrips what can be serviced sufficiently with volunteers. So organizing, James Richards, our director of that department, will speak in a few minutes, but just to rattle off a few things, we've developed a truth booth concept which people can volunteer to set up in their area. It's it's a step towards the formation of truth action groups, which are support groups for people in an area who are looking for a voice and a platform and a home and a community. And our goal is to take those truth action groups and integrate them at the state regional level, also to use them as a base for electing our national board. Those are all traditional grassroots organizing concepts. In addition, James has brought us a new concept called the distributed autonomous organization, which is an application of blockchain technology. And it's an exciting area we're looking at now, which basically is a virtual form of grassroots organizing, which might come in handy if we happen to be operating it someday, God forbid, in an environment of worse shutdowns than we have now. Some of the communications projects that Morgan Nowlen, our communications team leader, will speak to are these. I don't want to rattle through all of them, but the Zoomcast is one. The podcast that Morgan is heading up, and which many of you have been in correspondence with him about, will be really the only one that I know of that's going to be focused primarily on on action and organizing. This theme of truth demands action. It'll be focused, among other things, on the how-to to do that. So we're glad that he's assembled a team of volunteers who are almost more than he can handle right now, which is great. So he's spending a lot of time working with that group, and we hope to have the podcast up soon over the summer. We have a newsletter. We have a website capably administered by Dan Hennon. We have a team of social media folks, and we could always use some more of them. We have a great video production guy, JB Hockersmith, and we hope to give him so much work that he'll cry uncle and need more supporters in that kind of work. Part of communications is to have a unifying message, and a unifying message is one that that can bring enough people together so that we can achieve a level of scale where our actions and our really have an impact and command respect. We can't do that if we are very mired in doctrinal disputes and arguing about details, we have to keep an eye on the big picture. So the unifying message aims to be just that. We take 9/11 as the central theme of it, not just because of the events, the importance of 9/11 2001, but because we see it as a sort of a window into the madhouse, by which I mean the edifice we all live in, perhaps operating under what might perhaps be a delusion that we live in a fully democratic state with a government that only thinks about our best interests and would never consider murdering or not investigating the death of 3,000 people on the streets of New York on a given day. So it's necessary that this message encompass diverse views and to reach out to other organizations. We're interested in developing a concept that I'll call freedom of information. It's broader than freedom of information in the sense of the Freedom of Information Act that Mick was talking about. But it would include, I think, a growing outcry among the people to roll back secrecy, to roll back covert operations, which were originally intended to be plausibly deniable, but that's all backfired now. Even when they don't do a covert operation, it's suspected that the CIA did it. We're questioning the appropriateness of the legality of that. We want to end unconstitutional surveillance. We want to make sure the internet stays free. We want to protect independent journalism. And I could add, you could all help me add to that list. But that is a theme which we think embraces many advocacy groups which may or may not be right now focused or aware of 9/11, but it gives us some common ground to talk with them. But all of these messages are related to the overarching theme of truth demands action. We also have this ideal, which we've already adopted resolutions for, that TAP should become, as we grow in truth action groups, a truly member-driven organization. That means through those truth action groups. We absolutely need member involvement in strategic planning, in coming up with new projects and in managing them, certainly in volunteering to help carry those projects forward, helping us to raise grassroots funding for ourselves and for the Lawyers Committee and potentially for other groups. We certainly can't have achieve a democratic organization without deep member involvement in it. And we also need member involvement to assure that we maintain the necessary level of security, because we all know that there is such a thing out there, unfortunately, as trolls and infiltration. Supporting the Lawyers Committee. Most of what I just said should sort of speak for itself as to how we intend to help the Lawyers Committee. Right now, the committee is primarily focusing on its litigation activities. At the moment, there's not a great need for anybody to be out in the streets or waving placards or anything, and maybe there never will be, but I think there will be. There certainly is a need, though, for broad grassroots political support. And you can imagine if we had 100 truth action groups around the country, then Mick and Dave Meiswinkle would have plenty of audiences to come to, and we could organize substantial mass events, which would greatly raise the profile of the committee, enable it to raise the funds it needs to expand its resources. And what we've learned, what TAP has learned over the past 2 or 3 years, is that the task of creating such an organization and managing it, as I already said, is a piece of work. And TAP is focusing on it. The Lawyers Committee has other things to focus on, just as the architects and engineers have important work to focus on. So that's why we think that there is a need for this group along with the other groups, and we do collaborate. As we build this kind of network for supporting the Lawyers Committee, it's also a group which can support groups like Chris Gioia's firefighters, and Dan Hanley's pilots organization. I think I saw Dan is on the call. Shout out to both of you if you're on. And we ultimately can use this structure to support and to assist other groups supporting freedom of information in that broad sense that I use the term, so that we collectively build a stronger base. So some of you listening to this may say, well, this sounds nice, but it sounds hopelessly ambitious. We're never going to be able to do that. Well, I don't agree. There's plenty of reasons why we can succeed. Some of them have to do with the work that's been done by the 9/11 Truth organizations themselves, but a lot of it has to do with other things that are going on around us, which we need to be very mindful of. and not least of all, because our fears of what 9/11 would bring, we might be wondering if they haven't already come true, some of them. And some of the is reflected in the fact that our political parties and the mainstream media are probably more discredited than they ever were. People who have political opinions are looking around and they're finding that they have no place to go. If you believe that a 9/11 truth investigation is needed, good luck with the Republicans and good luck with the Democrats. So we need in the first instance, we need a support group, and we need an action base. The people who feel this way, who feel disenfranchised and alienated and left out of the system, need help, and we need one another. I left off this chart, but I shouldn't have. Clearly, we're facing a time of increasing economic stress. I won't speculate about how serious it will get, but even though individual circumstances may get tougher and more austere, I think we will all be aware that even as each of us tries to fend for ourselves, that we still need one another. And what we're trying to do here is to basically redevelop our civic structure in a way that both undergirds politics and enables us to undertake collective action in things which matter. And so perhaps the biggest thing is that people don't want to be lied to anymore, and the growing realization that our institutions have largely failed us and we have no one to turn to but ourselves. So that's really what I had to tell you, except for one thing. Finally, after a number of years, we have decided we want to launch our first fundraising drive, and we're really launching it tonight. It's a modest goal, but we've set a goal of $20,000 so that we can hire a first staff person who would be a part-time executive secretary. I don't mean secretary like typing letters. We mean someone who would help all of our volunteer department heads and project leaders just cope with the challenge of managing an increasing flow of volunteers. So if you've stuck with us this far and you think we are doing something that's meaningful and worthwhile, and if you think that there's a need for a truth community which empowers local groups, please consider helping us out tonight. And in the coming weeks, we'll flash some donate buttons on the screen, both for ourselves and for the Lawyers Committee. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll pass the mic back to, well, first, here's our websites. First look at them if you haven't had a chance to look at them. The top one is for TAP and the other is for the Lawyers Committee. And with that, I'll hand it back to Mike to introduce our younger generation of leaders on our TAP board, and they'll talk about what they're doing as project managers and department heads. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to be posting the links in the chat that Bill mentioned a little later. But right now we're going to hear from two of our project leaders, Morgan Nowlen and James Richards. First, Morgan. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a link in the chat to a form that you can go to sign up to be part of some of these projects that they're talking about. And Morgan Nowlen is from Charlottesville, Virginia. He has experience with community, radio, and professional canvassing and activism. In his 9/11 work, he focuses on controlled demolition and strategic communication. He's going to talk about some projects he's working on. Go ahead, Morgan.
Thanks, Michael. Howdy, folks. I would ask how we're doing, but there's no way to really take in what you, everyone's even just clapping or, you know, saying yay, which is a good thing to say. Anyway, what's the point of working with TAP? What is TAP's focus? Well, ultimately, we have an ultimate goal to prove 9/11 was an inside job to the public, fundamentally, totally, legally, every single thing that needs to happen to change our world for the better. And we can. How? In the most simplest of terms, by using our numbers, just like many movements have done in the past and are currently doing things. And the most important thing is you, each person, every single individual truther or truth advocate or person that thinks a new investigation would be good, whatever you term yourself, we need you. And we need to work together with you and everyone to common goals. Basic stuff here, across different opinions though. We need to respect each other, so much so that we're having fun together. Anyway, the entire point of all of our activism in the 9/11 Truth Action Project goes to one thing, and that's putting 9/11 truth in front of people successfully with great messaging over and over and over and over and over. Kennedy's hand wasn't forced to sign civil rights legislation until news reporters with cameras covered a protest with African Americans being treated inhumanely, and the entire nation saw that on the nightly news. Well, we need that. A good message everywhere. We are working to put our message in truth booths that would be at a farmer's market, in the podcast, giant vigils, alternative search engines, video platforms, newsletters, radio, PBS. Oop, check PBS. How about many drones with projectors attached to them, putting a video of Building 7 coming down against a giant facade of a tall skyscraper? Let's get creative. What do you bring to the project? We're excited for each and every one of you. That's the whole point. You know, whether we're entering film festivals, whether we're putting flyers on corkboard at cafes, you know, the sky is the limit, street demonstrations, giant puppets. We have many things at tap, including cryptocurrency called the Truth Coin, which is an Ethereum blockchain currency, I believe, if I'm not messing that up. I might be. Anyway, there's a huge market in autonomous, non-centralized, and independent of, well, the government, things out there that, you know, and those markets, those people dealing in those areas, they're just ripe for 9/11 truth. Ultimately, we want our truth to be in front of 26 people in a New York U.S. District courtroom. We also want our truth to be outside that courtroom with as many protesters, loud as can be, outside the courtroom. Ultimately, we want our 9/11 truth in front of a senator or a congressperson on the floor of Congress, being suggested as something to take seriously. And all that said, it's whatever idea, whatever thing you want to work for, that's what we're interested in. And that's 9/11 Truth Action Project. And it'll take many different skills, backgrounds to make it possible. And that's why each person is important. You know, and our product, each act, each action will ultimately be resemblant of the people that worked on that action. That's what brings us to the podcast, which is my area of focus, in addition to communications and how we get a message that works on this, in this place, in the truth booth, or on social media, or, you know, in a flyer, and coordinating so that we can use our numbers. We come to the podcast, and obviously we're going to have distinguished guests and news segments, and we're going to talk about how to do this. What's the right message? But the big importance of the podcast, as Bill was saying, it's a new thing, just to a decent extent. We're gonna engage with the truthers out there, the truth 9/11 truth community. We really want to talk to them. We want to jump out of the podcast and go into their living room and invite them back into ours. The movement has gone through so much. We've been alone. We've done tedious work. We've been disrespected and ostracized and made to feel as if our opinions, our basic intelligence, reasoning capabilities, and identity didn't deserve to exist. Well, we're going to do a lot of work with the podcast. But aside from the work and figuring out what happened and talking about how to approach people, We need a place where we can exist. We need a place where we are welcome, where our culture can flourish, where we can breathe our air. Enough with the speechiness of what I'm doing right now, but we want to engage the truth movement. Each individual truther, we want to showcase you. What are you doing? What is this person doing? Each episode should have a new person or persons calling in, asking questions, showing us what they're doing. That's what it is, a giant quilt work of people being active for 9/11 truth. And that's how I want to decorate the podcast. I want, as my idea, at first, maybe I was thinking my own thing, for the podcast. And, but, as I really started to think about it, what we really need is just a frame for each truther to put themselves on, for each action to put it, to put into there, and maybe we decorate the podcast set with paraphernalia from 9/11 history. We sure have probably like 1,000 different 9/11 truth flyers that have been used throughout history. Let's work together. That's our big thing. We invite you into the living room of the podcast, and we want to work with you on any level, in any department of TAP. And what we're going for is the shared experience. In addition to working, the shared experience. We want to kick it with each other. We want to give people a place where they can empower each other. Truthers can empower each other by affirming our most basic shared identity. And of course, embracing and respecting and working positively with people that have different opinions than you. And I am done with my presentation. That's it. Welcome to TAP.
Thanks, Morgan. Once again, folks, in the chat, there's that link if you want to get involved. It's the most recent link in the chat. And remember, you can put your questions there as well. Our next speaker is another project leader. His name is James Richards. James was in New York City the day of 9/11, became active in 9/11 Truth on 9/11/2002, and screened Loose Change Second Edition in Manhattan as part of that film's launch. He's a TAP board member, as well as a member of the organizational development team and the executive committee. James.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this goes better for me. So as part of organizational development, I was there at the beginning of so-called 9/11 Truth. I remember standing on the corner of Houston and Broadway 2 days after 9/11, and the air was still kind of hazy from the explosive disintegration of the buildings. And I remember saying to friends that I don't know what happened to the towers, but I don't believe the Pentagon went down like that. That's because I was raised as an Air Force brat and knew something about how jet planes work in terms of responding to potential dangers. So I have been working somewhat on the truth booths. Those have been somewhat difficult to deploy due to recent events, but we are still hoping to build kind of an analog component to activism to encourage a model of people getting together in their local communities and having face-to-face conversations and being able to review the evidence that has been exhaustively prepared by the Lawyers Committee and by the many researchers over the almost 2 decades since 9/11. There's also a digital component to this equation. Because I was there during the early days of 9/11, I was familiar with a lot of the, I'll call it internecine warfare that developed between different theorists as to what happened that day, and has kind of seen the rise of what people refer to as social media, but I tend to think of as anti-social media because it seems to have produced more division in society than agreement. So that's where the blockchain kind of comes into the equation. And what you should see on your screen right now is a colony that I set up. Just to give you a brief overview of what a colony is. A colony is kind of an operating system for organizations. It's built on top of the Ethereum blockchain, so it never goes away. Blockchain software is probably the first example of software that I can think of that is a planetary scale software. It scales to the size of the planet. Technically, Ethereum can scale to the size of a solar system or even the size of a galaxy. So in terms of its capabilities, it could scale off the planet. And I chose Colony because it kind of incorporates various concepts that are very common to organizations, like having contractors work on things, having different domains within the organization, being able to allocate budgets, and it maintains something known as reputation. One of the things that came out of being very active in 9/11 in the old days was that you know, a lot of people, maybe they wanted to do things, but they weren't able to, or maybe they did things, but they weren't really recognized for doing those things. And reputation is kind of this concept of activists who become involved in projects should become recognized over time for their contributions, not necessarily monetarily, but, you know, if you really put a lot of effort into contacting senators, or if you're supporting Christopher Gioia's effort and you're contacting firehouses, you should gain reputation over time so that people become aware that, yes, this is someone who has actually done things and really has contributed to activist efforts. And there are other kind of concepts of permissioning, revenues, resolving of disputes. Certainly, I've seen many disputes over the years regarding different theories and who's right and who's wrong and things like that. It's possible on a blockchain to build software that executes itself over time, which simplifies the ability of a small organization to reach a large scale. So the colony that I created is called 9/11 Data. I call it this because I didn't want to limit it, say, simply to 9/11 TAP or Lawyers Committee. I wanted it to be able to incorporate any 9/11 effort into a single data-centric model that over time would not become a memory hole. One of the things that I saw happen in 9/11 Truth is that a lot of good work was done, it was discussed, and then it went down the memory hole. And blockchains are designed to not let things go down the memory hole. So right now we haven't done a lot of work with this because I was waiting for certain features to become available. But this is a fully functioning way of reaching out to the cryptocurrency community, and also of you know, creating tasks and rewarding people for the completion of those tasks, both in the form of reputation and in the form of what we're calling a truth coin. So a truth coin is a token. It has a address on the blockchain, and what it really represents is kind of it's an abstraction of the notion that we value truth, because as Orwell has observed, you know, in an age of universal deceit, telling the truth is the most revolutionary thing you can do. And that's kind of the genesis of this concept of a truth coin. So there is a functioning community. You can see that as with any blockchain community, it is fully transparent. So any funds that go into it are tracked. Any funds that go out of it are tracked. So you kind of have an open governance model, and people would be able to join it either through an identified form or through an anonymous form and form their own kind of sub-communities and be truly decentralized while operating towards a common goal. So that's a high-level overview of this. And as you can see, there are kind of sub-communities and has notions. The other side of this is that we have kind of begun actively accepting cryptocurrency donations. This is what's known as a multi-sig wallet. What that means is that there are several people on the wallet who are kind of able to group approve transactions. A single person is never in control of the funds, so that if we do begin to accrue cryptocurrency transactions into the wallet, nobody has the single key to that. It becomes a group decision how to dispense those funds. So those are kind of the technological overview. We do still have the analog component that's technical, to the efforts. And it's my hope that we can bridge the gap between the analog and the digital realms to benefit both of them. And that's it for me.
Thanks, James. I'm going to post that link in the chat again to get involved. At this time, I want to call on Christopher Gioia, who's on the call, to tell us a little bit about the Justice for 9/11 Heroes project. Christopher Gioia is the commissioner of the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District in Long Island. Okay, you're on mute, Chris. You gotta unmute.
Trish, you should see the mute button on your lower left. Is Chris on?
Yeah, he's there. I see him. I'm pressing
Okay.
ask to unmute, Chris. You gotta unmute yourself. Hold on, let me see if I can. It's not giving you an option to unmute.
Is it possible his computer is got the sound turned off in addition to the Zoom?
Well, we do. If we can't hear from Chris, we do have Michael Atkinson on the call, who's very active in that project. Mike, would you like to see if I can unmute you? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about it. Can you unmute? There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear, Mike.
Okay, hello, my name is Michael Atkinson. I'm 39 years old. I discovered 9/11 Truth a long time ago, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I've become a Ron Paul fan. I got an honorable discharge from the Iraq War. I went to Kuwait, Africa, serving. I thought something was funny about 9/11, but anyway, in 2007, I started trying to share the best truth I can about it. And, just everything I could learn about it, I've tried to learn and share. So, but yes, I discovered the mutual aid request from Fire Commissioner Christopher Gioia. And before I knew that there was any kind of holding back on that, I wound up, I dressed up in nice clothes and a tie. That's just what I prefer. And I printed out some mutual aid requests, and I carried them in a binder. I actually carried them in the same binder that I had in the desert. I was an E5 team leader at one point. Anyway, I went to 5 different fire chiefs. I started with my local fire chief. I researched where they are, who they are, and I went and I gave about a 5-minute presentation to them, to 5 different ones in 5 different cities around me before the lockdown and all that kind of got bad. And I had told myself I was going to follow up with them. I mean, you know, you gotta admit, some of these people, it's possible they've never even heard of this, you know. I mean, it's possible. So I approached them like they've never even heard of it, you know. And so I catch them at their office. I go multiple times if I have to catch these fire chiefs at their offices. And I go in and I tell them that I have a mutual aid request for you from Fire Commissioner Christopher Gioia. I take it out, I hand it to them, and I tell them information has come out and we need a real investigation of 9/11, and we would appreciate it if you would look into this. It goes online, you can see the video about it. You know, then I tell them my own personal view. I say a lot of people know about this, and a lot of people support this. You know, I don't really remember any of them saying much to me except for that they would look into it. I'll admit I was a little nervous, you know, but I recommend giving a respectful, direct, you know, request for them to look into this matter and give them the mutual aid request, and then give them your 9/11 TAP contact card. You know, that's all you can do, you know, and then possibly I'm still thinking about following up with them, at least by email maybe, and seeing what they thought about it. That's what I did. Then I wrote up a small write-up about my experience doing that, and I was just trying to send that around to everybody if I could. I don't know if it needed changing. I didn't know if it needed to be added to or anything, because I haven't seen it come out yet. But that's what I did, and I plan to do more if I can, get myself together and go give more mutual aid requests to more fire chiefs in more cities around me. And that's all I have to say that I've done. I mean, I ran a 9/11 TAP booth at a festival, which I'm really hoping they let me come back. I didn't hear anything bad, and it went pretty good. I'm by myself, unfortunately. My family, friends, and neighbors have heard me talk about this. None of them seem interested, unfortunately. I mean, it's really, really amazing and very shocking to me how many people have showed no interest in this, even though they believe me. You know?
Yeah, that can be discouraging, Mike. Thanks a lot for sharing.
I'm not trying to be negative, but that's how some of these people are.
Right. Thanks for sharing your
Anyway,
experience,
continue
Mike.
to spread the word.
Thank you. Chris Gioia says he may be able to speak now. Let's see if we can get him on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, great. I want to thank TAP 9/11 for having me on tonight. I want to thank Mike Atkinson for what you did, and I could definitely appreciate the fact that, you know, you're out there trying to do the right thing, and people don't seem interested. So I definitely know what you're talking about there. To Morgan Nowlen, well, before I even talk about that a little bit, I just want to tell everybody that on July 24th of last year, the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District passed a legal resolution of support for the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the petition before him to get the grand jury investigation as proposed by the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And after that, I appeared in Washington, D.C. and at the National Press Club, and we announced the launching of a Justice for 9/11 Heroes initiative And the website for that is justicefor911heroes.org. And getting to Morgan Nowlen, I absolutely agree with you. Social media is a powerful tool, and we have to dispel the myths about 9/11 and keep hammering home and be relentless about our message to dispel all the misinformation, disinformation, and the myths. And you said you keep talking about truthers, and I was actually called a truther by a congresswoman's aide, and I found that to be very offensive to me, that they would use this term truther to disparage and to dismiss what I had to say. So I think moving forward, and this is just my opinion, that we should get away from saying 9/11 truth, and we should say 9/11 facts. And the truth could be subjective, but if you talk about facts, those facts are not subjective. The facts speak for themselves. So I think that should be considered moving forward. And I wanted to address Mick Harrison. Mick, in regards to the lawsuit and our legal actions, I wanted to know if we could slap charges against the United States Attorney under 18 U.S. Code Section 2382, and it's called misprision of treason, that they have knowledge of the commission of treason against the United States, and they're concealing, and they will not disclose to the judge or justice of a particular state about what's going on. So I would like to, explore that if possible. Let's throw something on them that we consider what they're doing. They're stalling, and they're trying to get the case dismissed because they're saying we have no standing. And to me, that is just it's a treasonous activity on their part. And I feel very strongly about that. So thank you once again, Mike, for inviting me here tonight. I know other people want to have a chance to talk, so I will end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Gioia. So we posted that link a couple of times in the chat to the Justice for 9/11 Heroes and the mutual aid request. Check it out. Bring it to your local tag. Also, just wanted to say a quick word about fundraising. I'm going to post into the chat the direct donate link for TAP and for the Lawyers Committee in just a second. And just wanted to say, the Lawyers Committee has been working really hard, and they've done a lot of their work pro bono. They can't do everything pro bono, so we got to support them because they got a long legal fight ahead. And TAP, likewise, we need funds too. We need to hire staff members like Bill Jacoby talked about, and we need to fund the things we're trying to do. So please be generous. At this time, we're up for Q&A. So I'm going to look in the chat here. I see there were several comments. I'm not sure if there are any questions. Let's see.
So Mike, Chris Gioia had a question for me, Mick. Should I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Chris, good to see you, and I appreciate your ongoing efforts. You raised an interesting legal question about misprision of treason, which is a real criminal statute, and it does impose criminal liability on persons who don't comply with the obligations under that statute, one of which, as I recall, I don't have the language right in front of me, but I have looked at it. And I believe it imposes an obligation on anyone with knowledge of a treasonous act to come forward and disclose it promptly, report it to a judge, report it to a court, report it to, the Attorney General. So we haven't taken a position on that yet, Chris, as a lawyers committee. We have talked about it. And if it were pursued, it probably wouldn't be restricted to just one official. There are a number of folks, including possibly some folks in the FBI, who may be in a position to have run afoul of that. There may be some folks in the military. There may be some folks in the former administration. So I'll pass on your question to the entire lawyers committee, and we'll look into it and discuss it, and we'll talk with you when we come to some conclusions.
Thanks, Mick. Just looking in the chat here, I see a lot of comments. Here's a question from Tom Rodman. Mick, what are some of your upcoming legal deadlines? When might we hear some news about some of your cases?
Well, there is a deadline I should be working on at this moment instead of talking to you all, and that is my appeal brief in the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C. on the FBI lawsuit that I mentioned. That brief is due on Monday. Still working on it. Other than that, the other 4 cases, active litigations I mentioned, we're waiting on the judge at the moment. District Court in New York on the mandamus case, and 3 federal judges in DC on the freedom of information cases. So we could hear something any moment, basically, on those 4 cases, and we'll let you know when we do. I've given up trying to predict when a judge will make a decision. They don't have, statutory deadlines, but some of them are pretty prompt. So stay tuned.
All right, we got a lengthy comment here. Let's see if there's a question attached to it.
I can sort of play with what Mick Harrison said and what the question to me was based on what you find there. Or not.
I'm sorry, Morgan, I couldn't make out what you said there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can definitely try to play with what Mick Harrison was saying and definitely sort of answer the question of Chris Gioia. Sorry, probably getting that wrong. Sorry.
I suspect Mike is waiting on you to go ahead, Morgan.
Ah.
I could be wrong.
you might not be. So as far as each of these, I'd say different places where the lawyers committee has figured out a way to fight within what's already set up, in the courts, in our legal system, our legal code, federally, locally, but not even that, to demand something back of NIST. I think that's really great. I think if we can actually demand that NIST respond, well, we've got another string that we're pulling at this, string rope, big, this big thing that we're all trying to work on. And to add to that, what I look, this is not me, my ideas, or my preaching. I just feel strongly about it, and that's what TAP. It's an essential part of TAP, and that's grassroots movements. People when they start going out of their houses, they start putting boots on the street. They start doing demonstrations. 50 people call in to C-SPAN. Or however many people called into C-SPAN, when Richard Gage spoke, and it's the most C-SPAN audience that's ever existed. We have what we need. If we can express it well, we've got what we need. We've got enough. And I just think I just want to watch more and more happen, more and more people do more and more things. And, besides that, working together, it's fun. It feels good. That said, I guess, Chris Gioia, are you able to rephrase your question to me? Because I think I've sort of drifted too far and I'm trying to bring it back in. I was very interested and I listened. If you could rephrase that.
Okay, can you hear me? Morgan?
Yes, I can, Chris.
Hello. I only had an issue with people labeling us as truthers, and it just brings a negative connotation to the word, and it's almost like they put you on the defensive, and they make it seem that telling the truth is bad. So rather than engage in nonsense with them over truth, I would just get away from that and say, 9/11 facts instead of 9/11 truth. Because now, when people hear the word facts, there's no debate over the facts, and that is my point. That was my point.
I respect that point. I find that term really it offended me in the first place, which is over a decade ago. I honestly wonder whether truther was created outside of the truth movement itself. There are so many derogatory words about people these days. It's ridiculous. And I fully share that. I guess I use truther, though most people interrupt me. I should stop using it, but then I have to say something like truth advocate that stands for a new investigation. I have to explain it over like a sentence and a half, and so that's, but screw it. That's what we'll be. But you actually have a great, truth realist. Someone else on the chat line has been talking about truth realism. Yeah, and really honestly, yeah, that's what we are. We're based on probably hundreds of millions of hours of research by individual truthers, by bottom of the scale, top of the scale, people putting out seminal works, whatever, and so also, part of our job with communications, especially on social media and search engines, is fighting censorship and using our own words, truth realist. Does Google have that one yet? I absolutely, I'm just, whatever our term is, let's put that in neon lights on, on giant skyscraper. That's it. Okay. Sorry. Done.
All right. We have some more questions in the chat. Here's one from Tom Rodman again. Nick, can you describe the team of other lawyers you're working with on your side? Why are you optimistic about standing issues? Do you think you may lose any battles simply based on standing?
Well, I think there are at least 3 questions there. We have some good lawyers helping us. And we have John O'Kelly in New York, who's our co-counsel on the mandamus case against the U.S. Attorney. We have David Colapinto in D.C., who's helping us in one of the Freedom of Information Act cases. We have John Clifford in D.C. helping us on another Freedom of Information Act case. Of course, David Meiswinkle is helping us on basically everything. And I'm trying to help him on his investigative stuff as well. We have a few lawyers both on our board and on our advisory committee, in addition to the folks. So we have a pretty good, I would still call it a small group of active lawyers. And as Bill said, we haven't really gotten the legal community to engage in significant ways yet. And that is disappointing to me as a lawyer. We haven't even gotten the public interest law community to engage in a significant way yet, which is doubly disappointing to me as a public interest lawyer. So we need to do more in recruiting more lawyers. And if you all know of any good lawyers in your neighborhood who have a conscience and integrity and a little courage, send them our way. We can use the help. In terms of why I'm optimistic about on the standing issue, I didn't actually say I was optimistic. I'm not pessimistic. Standing has been used by a number of judges, in my view, to limit citizen participation in public interest litigation, improperly limited. And not every judge is like that. Some apply the concept technically correctly in an objective way. We're hoping to get that kind of decision in our cases. We got a bad decision in DC on the FBI case. And so the main reason I'm optimistic is we have folks like Chris Gioia and some of the family members who have joined us in our lawsuits as plaintiffs. And in my view, if the courts aren't going to respect folks like that and their right to bring these issues to the courts, we really have a problem. And it goes beyond 9/11, and we're going to have to address it. But I believe that folks like Chris and the family members do give us standing. I also believe in organizations like architects and engineers and the lawyers committee having their own unique organizational standing because of our missions. So I think the courts have just been a little too conservative in granting standing. We'll see how that works out in these cases. It's early to say on that. And then you had one more question about standing, which I've forgotten.
Do you think you may lose any battles simply based on standing?
Well, the answer is yes, because we lost one in DC already at the district court. We're appealing it. If you mean ultimately lose them, I'm cautiously optimistic we will not lose any of the battles we've started, the 5 active litigations on standing. We shouldn't, and I don't believe we will. The courts of appeal involve more judges. They involve more experience typically, and often more sophisticated understanding of the law than the district court judges. No offense to the district court judges intended, but that's the way the courts are set up. So I'm optimistic that we're going to get a good hearing in the courts of appeal on the standing issue when we need to. Folks may think that there's a low probability of winning an appeal, and traditionally that's true, but not on issues like standing, which are legal issues which the courts of appeal look at in what we call a de novo review, which means they look at it as if you brought the issue directly to them, no deference to the district court. So we have a good chance on those issues.
A question from Wayne. Is the NIST data quality suit a lawyers committee project, and can you speak to its status?
A little bit. I'm not in charge of it. I did consult on it with the lawyers committee's blessing and work with Ted Walter and some of the folks, and they did a great job on that request for correction to NIST. If you haven't read it, any of you, please do take time to read it. It's very well done. So it's not a lawyers committee project. It's an architects and engineers project, as I think Wayne knows, but we are supporting it. And if it comes to the point of the agency doing the wrong thing, we may be asked again to help out with litigation. Certainly we'll consider that at that point.
We have a question from Alfred Benoit, which I'll field. Is the new movie 7 out yet, and what are the plans of getting it out to the public? That's actually not a lawyers committee project, as to my understanding. It's an architects and engineers and Dylan Avery project. But according to A&E, the film should be coming out in September. But it's already been a 5-minute teaser that's been on PBS. Let's check the chat. Mick, there's another question for you. How do you keep a good attitude given that these cases go on and they're appealed over and over? That's from Tom Rodman again.
Yeah, a lot of cases take a long time, and there is this old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. There's some truth in that. I think we all have our ways of maintaining a constructive and positive attitude, but what really motivates me, I guess, 2 things. One would be fighting for the rights of the victims of 9/11, which still motivates me even 20 years after the fact. And, the victims haven't had the truth yet, and they deserve it. That includes the family members and the first responders and the police, who lost a lot of good folks. So if I can do something to bring truth out for those who were victimized, I'm never going to lose that motivation. Otherwise, it has to do with my own commitment to government accountability, which I've had since college. And, That's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I still have this maybe idealistic view of what America should be as a true democracy with real transparency and accountability in government. And having held that motivation for 67 years, I don't expect to lose it. Oh, did you hear me there? No, you muted me. Okay.
Sorry, man. I clicked on the wrong thing.
No, that's okay.
Mick, we have a question from James Richards. Would it be appropriate for the public to file amicus briefs with the Lawyers Committee?
Short answer would be yes at a certain point, and it depends on who in the public we're talking about, and that would vary with the case. I think maybe a group of family members, maybe a group of first responders, possibly a group from TAP. I think there may well be opportunities for friend of the court briefs, and we'll keep you informed on that. It's a good idea.
I have a question from Adam Fitzgerald. Have you gotten in touch with the Motley Rice? They're currently the law firm representing some of the 9/11 families. They're the ones currently petitioning for the Southern District of New York regarding Saudi documents which show financing to some of the 9/11 hijackers. They were successful recently.
I'm familiar with the Motley firm. We've had some communication with them. I really can't go into the details of that at the moment and where it stands and where it might go, other than to say we support their litigation for the family members. As I think everyone knows, it doesn't go as far on the 9/11 issues as we have or as others have. So there's, I think there's room for Motley to expand its horizons, and we'll see what we can do to help them do that.
Question from Dan Hanley. Mick, why aren't you going on Al Jazeera English and Press TV?
Haven't been invited yet.
I wonder why.
We'll send a copy of the proceeds to Al Jazeera after this.
Looking at the chat here, a lot of comments, not a lot of questions.
I see one from David Palmer that just popped up.
I'm way behind that.
Gotcha.
Messages. Hold on. Go ahead and respond to that question, Mick.
Yeah, I'm going to have to remember what it was. Shoot, I don't remember what it was. Does anyone remember David Palmer's question that just popped up? Maybe David Palmer can tell us.
Hold on one second. David, can you resubmit your question? I can't find it in the chat. David, can you submit your question again, please? David Palmer.
Is there a different thread you can check with him picked versus everyone else? Can you filter all the other messages?
Oh, there, I see it. What is my opinion on the Justice Department's claim that only they have the right to prosecute? I think it's a bullshit position. It doesn't comport with the statute. They would like it to be the law, but we briefed it pretty carefully to the New York District Court. There's actually a decision from 1985 from the U.S. District Court in New York where they acknowledge the history of the special grand jury statute and acknowledge that, citizens have always had the right under the Constitution and even common law before there was a Constitution to report crimes to grand juries. And the government, does have the right to decide whether to adopt an indictment and prosecute it. So to that extent, it's correct. But they've been using that argument to say, basically, what we're trying to do is to tell them what to do in the prosecution. all we're doing is saying, look, you have an obligation to hand our petition to the grand jury and let the grand jury decide what to do with it. And to the extent they want to confuse things by saying, oh, we're the only ones who can actually bring a criminal prosecution, that's not really the point. You know, the grand jury has the right to investigate, has the right to propose an indictment, has the right to even issue a public report on corruption, and they have a right to receive our petition. And so I think it's a confusion tactic by the government to focus on that argument.
We have a question from Thermal Detonator. It says, I have inquiries about Molly Rice regarding their position of the 2004 Dulles CCTV release to the media underlying the 6th hijacker for Flight 77. You know anything about that, Mick?
That's possession. He corrected it.
So I have no comment on that one.
All right. Don't see any other questions in the chat. Let's see. We have folks. Folks on the phone, if anybody has a question on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand if you want to ask a question by phone.
I have a question if we're just waiting. Something to fill the void.
Go ahead, Morgan.
Okay, so Mick, could you tell us about any specifics that might really flesh out our understanding of how special the special grand jury is, what Antonin Scalia has said, things like that?
It's a good question. The special grand jury is in some ways kind of special. It was designed to focus on organized crime activity. That's why it was initially created. But organized crime activity under the law is not defined in a narrow way, it's defined in a broad way. So it isn't just mafia stuff, traditional mafia stuff. It's basically any ongoing pattern of criminal activity involving multiple people. So we would, you know, our concerns would qualify there. So the other key thing about special grand juries is they have the right to give a report to the court, and the court, unless it finds a specific reason not to, should publish that report for the public. And listen carefully to this part, because there are some fine points here. If the grand jury, looking at an alleged federal crime, happens to discover government misconduct, for example, malfeasance, misfeasance, related to the alleged crime, but not actually rising to the level of a crime, the misconduct can be reported by the grand jury to the court and to the public, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime that can be prosecuted. So you know, the grand jury has a lot of powers, like subpoenaing witnesses, offering immunity to a witness to get around the, you know, the pleading the Fifth Amendment problem. They can work with the U.S. attorney to make a plea deal to someone to try to, you know, get at the higher level culprits from the lower level. So they have a lot of powers we don't have. And they can use those powers to investigate our alleged crimes. And if they discover other misconduct along the way, let's say they discover someone in the FBI was obstructing the early investigations, which might have prevented 9/11, or covering up 9/11 after the fact, just speaking hypothetically. Let's say they found evidence of that. That could be reported out by the grand jury, even if the U.S. attorney decided not to pursue an indictment. So those are the things I would bring to your attention.
So we can, I'm not sure, I have way too many little tiny questions, but we can share the information that came from the grand jury, even if they don't proceed with the next case with indictments, etc.
Hang on. That's true if the grand jury issues a report under its authority to issue a report. It's not automatically the case. They have to decide to issue a report, and you know, the court has to release it.
Is there any reason they would issue a report, or do we want to go on, Michael?
Well, I think there is a reason they would want to issue a report in something this important. I mean, we're finding indications of government misconduct everywhere we look on this issue. So I think the grand jury would as well. So I think they would have a motivation to issue a report, and there's a reasonable chance, even if they find a crime, and on the demolition they would almost have to find a crime. The real next question is, do they find a culprit to indict? If they do, the U.S. attorney does still have to sign the indictment. Now, if the U.S. attorney decided not to me, if I were on the grand jury, that would be a real motivation to issue a report.
That's wow. Okay. All the more reason to have protesters lining the streets outside the U.S.
Well, hang on, slow down on that one too. It's not my job to give TAP strategic advice, but I will say this, that lawyers have certain constraints. And one of those constraints is we can't do anything that's an attempt to influence a decision by a judge other than offer evidence and argument through the normal litigation process before the judge. Organizing a protest outside the courthouse is not a good idea for lawyers. Now, can non-lawyers do it? Yes. Do I think it would be productive or counterproductive? I think it would be much less productive than protest elsewhere. So I wouldn't recommend protesting at courthouses. Now, if you want to, do something to bring attention to the U.S. attorney, that's up to you.
Okay, I officially withdraw my.
No problem. I mean, I like your creative ideas, and I don't want to discourage them.
Nick, we got a question from James Richards. In a worst case scenario, does the common law permit the people to form a grand jury and issue a presentment of their own knowledge?
So I'm not sure I'm hearing that fully, but it sounds like the question is, can the grand jury do a presentment analogous to an indictment on their own initiative, even if the U.S. attorney doesn't want to prosecute? Is that, Mike, is that the gist of it?
I don't really understand the question either.
Can you read it one more time?
In the worst case scenario, does the common law permit the people to form a grand jury and issue a presentment of their own knowledge?
Okay, I understand it. What used to be the case before the Constitution is one thing, and what is the current practice is something else. I can tell you I don't expect the courts to allow citizens to form a grand jury and respect that citizen grand jury's power to subpoena witnesses. Mike had just muted me there. Be careful what you're touching.
I didn't mute anybody. Nick, you're muted. I didn't mute you.
Okay, somebody's muting me. I'm not sure why that's happening.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody doesn't want to hear this answer, but I'll give it anyway. So I don't think citizens can do their own grand jury would have the powers of a court-appointed grand jury. However, they can create their allegations, the supporting evidence, get it into the hands of a grand jury appointed by a court, which is close. The grand jury can also, even if the U.S. attorney doesn't want it, the grand jury can give a presentment, which is a proposed indictment of their own. The one thing I don't like about the current law and practice is it does not appear that the grand jury has the power to force the U.S. attorney to prosecute a presentment unless the U.S. attorney decides to sign it as an indictment. And so there's still a lot of prosecutorial discretion on getting a criminal prosecution. And I report that as the law, not as the way I would like the law to be.
If I could comment on that, I believe in the 1950s, a review of the grand jury was conducted and the presentment power was kind of deleted as quote unquote anachronistic. So that's somewhat what I'm getting at.
I've seen some of that case law. I don't think it has eliminated the right of the grand jury to give a presentment, but I do think that there's no power behind the presentment if the U.S. attorney doesn't want to sign it as an indictment, and that that does limit what, you know, how far citizens can go on their own initiative, or how far a grand jury can go on its own initiative, which is why I think this ability to do a public report is important. If the grand jury were to issue a public report with a lot of really incriminating evidence in it, which is something they could do, there may be civil litigation options for us once we see that evidence. And we do have control of those civil prosecutions, as you can see from what we're doing. So, you know, we're not entirely constrained here.
Nick, I got a question from Kim. What about the possibility that the Patriot Act was written before 9/11? Is that part of your investigation?
I would say that's a fair statement, and it's about 100% probability.
I've actually, I want to just jump in, everybody, folks. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. That means the University of Virginia is here, and I've actually been to a cafe, my favorite, in Charlottesville, and I saw Philip Zelikow, who wrote the outline and basic gist of the 9/11 Commission report before the Commission report even were in the same room together to start. It, you know, people like that, not to single out anyone, not to be against anyone, but you know, imagine 50 people outside his classroom asking the question, when did you write the 9/11 Commission report? That's something that, I mean, that comes to my mind, you know, whatever comes to your mind, you know, that's what we're about.
Question from Adam. How about resubmitting a new FOIA request about the computer hard drives collected from the Urban Moving Systems warehouse, which was an Israeli Mossad front company? You know anything about that, Nick?
I do. We have done a request to the New Jersey State Police on the high fivers issue, which is what this is about. Urban Moving was the employer of the high fivers. We are in the process of doing new requests to the FBI, and I would suggest that that question be submitted to us by email so we don't lose track of it. We can include the hard drives request in the new FOIA request. It's a good idea. It's consistent with what we're planning to do, so appreciate the thought.
Do you have the email address offhand, just so we can say it?
Which email? Ours? I can just give you mine.
Okay, yeah, sure. Just say it one time, and we'll print it in the chat.
It's basically my name. It's Mick Harrison, ESQ, MICK, HARRISON, E as in Edward, S as in Sam, Q as in Quincy, @gmail.com.
Could you give me just the letters again? I got lost.
It's okay. It's MICK, HARRISON, ESQ @gmail.com.
Gotcha.
Somebody got it. Mike got it.
All
Great.
right.
Thank you.
Well, I see, again, more comments in the chat, but I don't see any other questions for Mick or anybody. Tom, do you get any on the emails?
Let me look. Nope. Empty.
All right, well, I want to respect Mick's time. He's given us a lot of his time tonight. Thank you, Mick. Just want to wrap up with a few acknowledgements really quick. First, obviously, our guest, Mick Harrison. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Also want to thank Mike Atkinson and Chris Gioia for getting on sort of impromptu and talking about the Justice for 9/11 Heroes project. I want to thank the planning team for the Zoomcast. Morgan Nowlen, Tom Rodman, Bill Jacoby, and James Richards. And I want to thank for some of the outreach and website stuff. We had Dan Hennon and Allison Maynard. And of course, I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please make use of the links we sent tonight. Join up for projects, make donations, and we'll try to do another one of these Zoom casts pretty soon, and we'll put the word out there.
Do we have the links in front of us to put them on the chat and say them one time?
Yeah, let's put the links in again. Hold on. Here we go. All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Good night.